Hi, welcome to Pyrography Made Easy. I'm Brenda. In this tutorial episode, I'm going to show you how to create the stylized rose that I did for a harp. Previously, I shared a time-lapse video of the test burn I did for the harp, but this is the actual artwork that will appear on it. Now, the great thing with the stylized rose is you don't need a reference photo. Any rose drawing will work because the petals all receive the same steps. So let's get to work. Begin by burning pull-away strokes along the right edge of the petal. Start the stroke on the edge of the petal and pull it towards the center of the petal. I mentally visualize a dot to represent the center of the petal. Then I burn all of the pull-away strokes so that they head towards that dot. The little photo in the upper right-hand corner is showing a red dot that I am mentally visualizing, and the yellow lines are the burn stroke directions. Notice how the strokes that I'm burning have a gentle curve or arch on them. After the right side of the petal is done, then burn pull-away strokes along the left edge of the petal. Start the stroke on the edge of the petal and pull it towards the center. Reburn as needed to build up the color. Also, burn some thin, darker lines to add tonal variation and texture to the petal. The middle of the petal should be lighter than the edges. If you think the middle is too light, just reburn over it to darken it up. Move on to the next petal and repeat the process of burning pull-away strokes along the outer edge of the petal. Start the stroke on the edge and pull it towards the center of the petal. Again, I mentally visualize a dot in the center of the petal, and I burn all of the strokes so that they head towards that dot. Like before, gently curve the lines towards the center of the petal. Make sure to burn some thin, dark lines on the petal for tonal variation and texture. With this larger petal, also burn pull-away strokes along the inner edge of the petal. Start the stroke on the edge where it touches the next petal and pull it towards the outer edge of the petal. Burn the stroke in a gentle curve or arch. This will give the petal a very curved appearance. Plus, it will darken the petal and give you clean edges between the different petals. I didn't vary my burn strokes very much, so I'm burning in a number of thin, darker lines to give the petal texture. I often burn a thick, solid line along the edges of the petal before I begin burning pull-away strokes. Afterwards, begin the process of burning pull-away strokes that curve towards the center of the petal. Of course, before getting started, mentally visualize a spot to represent the center of the petal. I mentioned that I often burn a thick line along the edges of a petal. I do this to create a small buffer zone. If I should burn a pull-away stroke that didn't start right on the edge of a petal, the buffer zone will hide the little gap. This ensures that the petal has nice, clean, clearly defined edges. To finish the petal on the rose, burn pull-away strokes along all of the edges of the petal. This includes both the outer and inner edges. Make sure to burn the strokes so they have a gentle curve or arch that radiates outward from the center of the petal. Also, vary the color or darkness level of your burn strokes. Burn the petal so the middle of the petal is lighter than the edges, as this will give the petal a rounded shape to it. Lastly, if needed, burn thin lines with the razor edge of the shader to give the petal texture. With this petal, there was a user malfunction with the camera, so not very much of it got recorded. The petal gets the same treatment as the other petals, so burn pull-away strokes along the inner and outer edges. With this last outer petal, begin by first mentally visualizing where the center of the petal is. Then start burning gently curving pull-away strokes that arch from the edge of the petal towards the center of it. As always, vary the color or darkness level of your burn strokes. It might be helpful to rotate the board and try burning in a different direction. With this petal, burn the pull-away strokes along the inner edge several shades darker than the outer edge. This is accomplished by reburning the pull-away strokes along the inner edge several times. We want the inner edge of the petal to be darker so that it will provide contrast with the adjacent right petal. The outer edge of the petal should be considerably lighter so that it will contrast with the left adjacent petal. Burn along the upper edge of the petal the green arrow is pointing to on the inset photo. Then start working on the long petal that the arrow is pointing to. Color this petal using pull-away strokes that are burned along the outer and inner edges of the petal. Burn the strokes in a gently curving direction. Reburn as needed to build up the color. With the inner petals, I don't visualize the petal center. Instead, I just burn curving lines and make sure that the middle of the petal is lighter than the edges so that the petal looks rounded. Burn along the lower edge of the small petal. This small petal should be pretty dark for contrast purposes. Burn darkly on the petal where the green arrow is pointing to create a cast shadow from the overlapping petal above it. Then proceed to burn curving pull-away strokes on this petal. Since this flower petal will be surrounded by darker petals, don't make the edges of this petal extremely dark. Burn a small section of the left side of the petal to a dark brown color, and then fill in the rest of the petal with curving pull-away strokes. With this small petal in, burn curving pull-away strokes along its edges. Vary the color or darkness level of the burned strokes to give the petal texture. This is another petal that you repeatedly burn along the inner edge to build up the color. A dark color along the inner edge provides a nice contrast with the adjacent petals below it. Burn the backside of this petal to a dark color, as this will convey the impression it is not receiving direct sunlight. Leave the left edge a couple of shades lighter for contrast with the adjacent petal. Also, burn curving pull-away strokes on the adjacent petal. Burn curving pull-away strokes along the inner and outer edge of this rose petal. With the last of the middle rose petals, burn curving pull-away strokes along the inner and outer edges. Make sure to vary the color or darkness level of the burns. Also, burn the inner edge several shades darker for contrast with the adjacent petals. Rotate the board if needed while you work. I had to rotate the board to burn a line along the inner edge. Because the size and awkward shape of the board, I wasn't able to capture the burning on video. The center petals of the rose are pretty small, but you still burn curving pull-away strokes along the inner and outer edges. As always, vary the color or darkness level of the burn strokes to create texture. And, if needed, use the razor edge of the shader to burn thin, curving lines on the petals for additional texture. How much texture should you put on the petals? That is just a matter of personal choice. Make sure that the contrast between the petals is good so each petal can be easily seen. If needed, adjust the contrast levels by reburning. The last of the rose petals are really small, so fill them with color and a touch of texture. No one is going to look that closely at them, so don't worry about making them perfect. Burn in the center vein on the leaf, and then burn a dark band next to the petals. The dark band will represent a cast shadow from the rose petals onto the leaf. Next, begin burning uniform strokes along the upper right side of the leaf. Then burn a dark line along the right edge of the leaf. Continue this along the left edge of the leaf. Make the edge jagged by burning short, dark lines or dashes that stick out slightly from the edge of the leaf. Finish burning in the leaf. I am using a little bit of circular motion, but mostly I am using uniform strokes. The uniform strokes are nothing more than lines or bands of color burned so that they are uniform in color. Concentrate the color along the edges of the leaf. I like to work on one half of the leaf at a time. I give each half an initial layer of color and then begin the reburning process to darken up the leaf. As I said before, I mostly use uniform strokes for burning in the leaves, but I do occasionally use circular motion. The circular motion is usually to increase the darkness level along the edges to transition from the really dark jagged edges to where it's a little bit lighter in the center. How dark you make your leaves is up to you. Looking at the inset photo in the upper right corner, you can see that I burned my leaves to a medium brown color, as I wanted them considerably darker than the rose petals. With the other leaf, repeat the same basic steps. Create a cast shadow on the leaf right next to the petals. Burn the vein line down the center of the leaf. Burn darkly along the edges of the leaf. Then fill in the leaf using the burn stroke of your preference. As I said before, I mostly used uniform strokes and some circular motion. Make the edges of the leaf jagged by burning short lines or dashes that stick out past the edge of the leaf. Reburn as needed to build up the color and texture of the leaf. Make sure that the overall color and texture matches the other leaf. That's it for this tutorial. I hoped you liked it and found it easy to follow along with. On my website, Pyrography Made Easy, I have a written version of this tutorial along with a free pattern. Well, thank you for watching, and I will see you next week.